To understand the history of Records, one of the most influential dance and hip-hop labels in America, we are going to examine a documentary about them that features absolutely zero music. Stripping away the soundtrack removes the emotional influence of a driving bass line or a familiar melody. This forces the audience to look past the romance of nightlife and analyze the unglamorous physical infrastructure required to keep an independent label alive for 3 decades. This diagram outlines the documentary's global style lock. Instead of relying on nostalgic photo montages, the film constructs its narrative entirely from clean, extruded 3D vector graphics, restricted to highly specific colors like navy and teal. There is exactly one rule for conveying life in this environment. Notice the turntable. A constant 8 to 12 Hz baseline vibration is applied exclusively to analog gear to mimic the real-world physical hum of electronic equipment. The architectural shapes behind it remain completely static. These rigid algorithmic design constraints act as a historical map. By simply noting a shift in the color palette or the specific geometry of the equipment on screen, the viewer is instantly oriented across different technological epochs of the music business. Surviving the music industry is a structural challenge. A label must physically weather shifts in format and distribution just to stay operational. This wide-angle photograph captures the physical reality of a record store in 1995. Before digital streaming, a record label was a physical place, defined by pressing heavy vinyl, shipping boxes, and convincing store owners to provide shelf space. That year, a young music enthusiast named Chris Smith was digging through the crates at Tweakin' Records in San Francisco. There, he struck up a conversation with Steve Gray, and the two began laying the groundwork for a new venture. Records was born in the apartment situated directly above that exact record store. Standard independent labels of the era survived by picking one highly specific niche, exclusively pressing Detroit techno or East Coast hip-hop. Ignored that convention, acquiring music across the entire cross-pollinated club scene, from acid jazz to deep house. They operated on a single thesis they called future music. They bet entirely on the physical source vibration of a track, explicitly ignoring what was currently trending on commercial radio. Finding success relied on an entirely manual, unscalable algorithm, trusting a single person's ear in a crowded room, pressing their selection to vinyl, and hoping the public agreed. The documentary signals genre expansion through hard palette shifts. To represent the late 90s, the crisp navy and teal give way to a hazy wash of warm amber and brown tones. This warmth maps to the mushroom jazz era. A Chicago DJ named Mark Farina realized that massive rave environments created a demand for a slower landing pad. He dominated the club's secondary B room by blending downtempo beats with hip-hop and jazz samples. The commercial response was an anomaly. Farina's DJ mix compilations began moving over 100,000 units each, figures entirely disconnected from the typical sales volume of a niche downtempo release. Look at this schematic of the A&R process. To find the next hit, labels rely on the slush pile. This diagram tracks thousands of unsolicited cassette demos flooding the label. To visualize the chaotic noise of unvetted audio, the documentary deliberately breaks its own clean style, aggressively spiking the visual film grain to 40%. In the year 2000, hired an A&R assistant named Ryan Radin specifically to listen to this massive pile. Quietly, Radin began seeding his own anonymous productions into the stacks. The documentary visualizes the moment of discovery as a physical cleanup of the frame. The grain instantly restores to a crisp 10% as a single track is extracted from the noise. This photograph shows the result of that manual vetting process. Radin's anonymous tapes were selected purely on their sonic merit. He adopted the stage name Kaskade, and launched his career. To underscore the rarity of this discovery, the documentary breaks its strict no-music rule exactly once. A heavily muffled, ghostly vocal snippet plays for exactly 2 seconds at the precise moment the winning cassette is found, before hard-cutting back to silence. Authentic A&R discovery requires a manual, agonizing human filter. Automated curation and algorithmic recommendations cannot replicate the grueling labor of sifting through the noise to find the signal. This photograph of a pristine CD jewel case represents the late 90s peak of physical media. The business model was highly predictable, manufacturing a disc for pennies, selling it for $15, and banking the margin. This image of Sean Fanning represents the end of that specific model. In 1999, he wrote a piece of peer-to-peer file-sharing software called Napster, allowing users to distribute digital audio files for free. The market consequences were immediate. Physical CD sales plummeted. Across town in San Francisco, Naked Music, the city's largest house music label, could not survive the revenue drop and permanently closed its doors. The documentary visualizes this industry collapse literally. The primary revenue vessel of the 1990s is shattered into dozens of suspended fragments, leaving the label with broken assets and no obvious path forward. Ohm Records was vulnerable. They produced niche dance music and lacked the massive radio-friendly pop stars required to generate tour revenue and out-earn the piracy crash. To survive, they executed a rigid structural pivot. Rather than trying to force their fans to buy CDs, they took the deep instrumental heavy tracks they already owned and established a dedicated television sync licensing desk. The visual shards from the destroyed CD do not disappear. Instead, they pull together and reorganize into a glowing television set, assets repurposed for a new medium. The strategy worked. Underground house tracks began playing underneath scenes of Sex and the City and CSI. Licensing fees from massive television networks replaced the missing retail revenue. While critics debated the ethics of television placement, those licensing fees were subsidizing underground vinyl releases that would have otherwise vanished as the physical market folded. This wide shot shows San Francisco's Embarcadero Plaza. In May 2026, Ohm Records threw a free public party here to celebrate their 30th anniversary. The lineup for the event featured Mark Farina, Kaskade, and the original artists who signed with the label in the late 90s. They returned 3 decades later, providing hard evidence of the enduring relationships Ohm had maintained. Ohm reached 30 years by refusing to automate their output. They ignored the EDM explosion and the streaming gold rush, and they currently operate without the help of the industry's AI tools. Look at this final data point: 800 releases, 30 years in operation, 3 full-time staff members. That mathematical equation proves that a lean operation, guided by rigorous human taste, can scale better and survive far longer than bloated corporate infrastructure. Modern music labels frequently exist as holding companies or subfolders on a massive conglomerate server. Ohm maintained the physical reality of a label, a small room with a few people making decisions. By stripping away the music, the documentary forces the viewer to acknowledge the actual labor, exposing the label as a purely operational entity. Independent survival comes down to 3 people in a room, answering phones and listening to tapes. This quiet manual labor is the foundation of the label's history. This quote represents their unchanged thesis. A label is a bet on a sound. It is somebody's taste made public. In its final moments, the documentary draws the Ohm Lotus logo one last time, shifting to a warm sunset orange. Ohm Records outlived its peers by refusing to automate the human act of listening. Their history is a 30-year bet on